Welcome to Agency Acquisitions and Exits, the podcast where we dive into the real stories behind buying, selling, and scaling agencies. I'm your host, Peter Lang. Today I'm joined by Ned McPherson. He created Enrock, a data-driven CRO agency that when he formed it, he didn't have the intentions to sell it. 5 years after founding, he exited for a life-changing, meaningful amount to Power Digital, a strategic in our space backed by Court Square. Ned shares his journey through the acquisition, the fact that he's 1 year through his earnout, and what he learned from working so closely with a PE-backed firm. He's here to debunk the negative reputation that PE gets in our marketplace. He also reflects on what he would have done differently to maximize the opportunity. And there's a lot of lessons you can glean. So let's dive in. Ned, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You built an agency from scratch and sold it. I mean, you could probably spend the entire time that we have together talking about that journey, but let's do the short version and get to where you are now as quickly as possible. So take us there.
Yeah, of course. So I had a background traditionally in building out data architectures and basically helping clients synthesize their consumer analytics data, right? Where that's kind of where I kind of started my career and teaching them, hey, this is what this means, breaking down things like their Google Analytics data, certain just custom analytics stacks. And they'd always get really intrigued by the different ideas that I was coming up with to say, hey, this is a really interesting data point that we found here. It might mean customers are wanting more of X from you or would convert better in Y. And they would usually ask me for recommendations like, well, what should we do different? Do you think we should change this on our site or within our mobile app or our architecture, whatever it was? So I'd come up with a whole list of recommendations and they'd always get really excited about them. But every time like clockwork, I'd come back 3 months later, 4 months later, and they had implemented none of the ideas, right? Just, basically sat on it, still loved the ideas, but never executed on it. So I kind of said, okay, there's a market to be had here in terms of the execution bit to this. Clearly, there's value in the recommendations and some of the synthesizing of data and making it all make sense. And so I started to kind of freelance. This was in like the 2016, 17, 18 timeframe in a bit, and started to freelance effectively where brands would hire me. I would work with their execution teams, help them get some of these experiments live on their website, things of that nature. It was slow, right? Because again, I was using their teams. I couldn't really implement my systems and my formula. And so I decided in the beginning of 2019 to form an agency, right? So January 2019, I started Enrock Growth and Analytics, basically to provide this service, full execution, conversion rate optimization, average order value optimization, basically tying in the intersection of consumer analytics with behavioral psychology, behavioral heuristics, all for the point of increasing average revenue per user output, right? And this was predominantly with direct-to-consumer brands, but a little bit with B2B and consumer-facing mobile web application as well. We scaled really quickly. We were basically referral only. We never really had a traditional sales engine. It was mainly all existing clients and referral partners, channel partners, things of that nature. And we scaled up to about 120 or so folks on the team, a few hundred clients, and were acquired in the very tail end of 2023, right? So almost exactly a 5-year rate there before we were acquired, about a month short of our 5-year anniversary. So,
and of course, you planned it that way, right? You sat down day one and you're like, 5 years work backwards. I've sold this thing and let's build this company, right?
Exactly. I wish I could say it was like that. And candidly, it's funny you bring that up. I didn't have any intention to exit. That was not the plan. And so, come 2023, we were growing 70, 80, 90% year over year. Business was great, working with a lot of great clients, having a lot of fun with it. Of course, the business was doing quite well. And it wasn't really on my radar. I was just really keenly focused on improving our systems and trying to spread the gospel, so to speak, and get our model for conversion optimization out there to more brands because it was working so well. And just the stars aligned, met the right people. And before you knew it, we were getting into LOI discussions, and then they started to become real, and decided to make the move. So.
I mean, that resonates with probably a lot of people who didn't start the business or agency to sell it. You said you got introduced to a lot of people. Unpack that for me. Like, how you didn't think about selling. So where did the seed of selling come from?
Sure. So I was working with we had a lot of partnerships with other agencies because we're predominantly post-click, right? So obviously we're working on all things as the user gets to the ecosystem, the website, the app, whatever it is. And then after that, right, whereas many agencies are acquisition centric, classic paid media, SEO, paid search, earned media, what have you, organic media. And so naturally, we would work really well with them because as we could increase the conversion rate or the average order value, that would have a positive feedback loop into better CAC to LTV ratios, better return on ad spend. So there was a really nice synergistic partnership there with a lot of paid media shops, as an example. There was one in particular that we were in discussions with about, potentially evaluating like a merger, like if we brought our post-click opportunities with their pre-click, et cetera. Effectively what happened is as those conversations started to progress, some people in that ecosystem of conversation said, hey, have you ever considered just going to market as a standalone? Because I think you've got a lot of assets here, right? Your team's really growing. You've had tremendous success thus far. And so that's when I got connected with Todd Taskey, right, from Potomac, who is, tremendous.
Good friend of mine. Yep.
Yeah. And so got connected with Todd and he said, look, I got a few larger, PE groups and agencies I think you need to have a chat with. And so he was very patient with me. We spent about a month and a half, I want to say maybe 2 months of me just bombarding him with questions and trying to understand the landscape. And he was excellent. And then we kind of methodically started to get into a potential LOI stage. Then we did go into LOIs and then it became real, right? When those started to come over and I started to see the actual valuations and, I was like, wow, okay, this is a totally different conversation now and something I think I'm going to seriously consider.
Now you had built the company to, good scale. Did you have any casualties, anything while your eye was off the ball that hurt the business or things that were concerning that you go, oh, if I could go back and avoid that, that would have been great?
Yeah, I mean, due diligence is really hard, right? I mean, it's a forensic look at everything you do from HR to AP and AR to how you acquire clients, how do you keep clients. You look at all of your last churns over years and want to understand and dissect every one of them and why. There's a lot there. And so you're absolutely right, trying to manage that while manage a growing business. And candidly, it happened in Q3 and Q4, which is usually our largest.
Sounds like a very busy time of year.
Yeah. So it was. And then, of course, you're trying to keep margins really strong. And so because of that, it was a very intense, it was a very stressful process. Obviously, it was all worth it at the end. I wouldn't say we had any real casualties per se. I think the team was tremendous and I owe them a huge debt of gratitude for how hard they worked in that window, knowing that my eye wasn't fully on the ball. It became evident certain people on the team, kind of to the contrary of casualties, we saw some people really rise to the occasion, right? So folks that we always knew were strong A players, but like really took a leadership role in that window, which was eye-opening for me as we were going to then go into integration. So, maybe it's just the curse of me being a really positive person, but like I saw a lot more pros than any cons in that and a lot more bright spots that came out of it. Everybody had a kind of a welcome breather there once the acquisition was closed. And now it's definitely been a lot easier for the team, I think, now that we're part of a larger organization.
So before we get into the deal and kind of the process around that, you had, within a short period of time, let's call it 4 years, created a high-performance lifestyle business. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, yeah.
And so you're in Miami, Florida. You're making good profits. I mean, you've gotten what seems to be like everything right. You wrote a 5-year plan to sell this thing. You've scaled it by people and person. It's not that easy. But you got something you fully control. What was interesting about selling that was better than, hey, I'm having a good time with the money I'm making now?
Yeah. So a few things. Mainly, and probably the single biggest was we were purchased, by Power Digital, right, which is a private equity backed, tremendous agency. And culturally, we really fit well. Starting with my conversations with Grayson, who was the original founder of Power, we really, really had a good relationship and kind of just could see the vision was the same there. What I really liked most before we got into anything financial related was the fact that we could put our CRO model on turbocharge, meaning they had some huge clients, right? And still do, obviously, some massive logos. And so I had always envisioned, how do I get to the Fortune 500s more? How do I get to the Fortune 50? This was a ticket in because they already had longstanding relationships and great contract value with a number of those companies. And this was going to be an easy service expansion. So that was a big one for me because, again, I really believe in our model. I think it is our model of basically experimentation, empirically backed experimentation for CRO, to me is the elixir to growth for any business. It's this concept of measuring the right data points, building thoughtful hypotheses, and then running aggressive experimentation. It doesn't matter if you're a lemonade stand or a Fortune 5 company, that's the key to growth. And I really believe that. So to basically piggyback on their size and basically market share to me was really attractive. On top of that, I was the classic solo founder, right? I had no partners, I had no investors, so I wasn't tapping into any advisory boards or any legitimate boards or anyone. So I was doing the whole thing myself in terms of, I was the finance department for a long time, very long time. I was the HR department. I was all these things. And every time I was focusing on all those other ancillary tasks that had to get done, but weren't what I really loved doing, it was kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot in a way, because I wasn't improving upon our product or our system. And so I saw a way to delegate all those roles off of my shoulders and be able to focus what I'm best at. And I think it was the right bet, because our division now within Power doubled in 2024, meaning after the acquisition, the company, if you want to call it that, doubled in size. So that's obviously great for Power and all its those who have a fiscal association with that enterprise, of course, to vet the thesis of the acquisition to begin with. But nonetheless, it goes to show that it was the right move, that as we as a CRO team got more honed in on our product, we doubled in size in 1 year. So
Yeah, you were able to quantify the impact of access to this bigger network, bigger support, and the freedom that would give you to allocate your time and energy into things that are material to moving the business forward. And you learned all that through the process of being courted by a buyer? You didn't have any of that sitting in your brain prior?
I did a bit, but like, again, I was just so focused and we were growing so fast and organically that I had started to think about, well, maybe I could be a platform, right? So I was like, maybe at some point I'll find a PE shop, as an example, who believes in what we're doing, and we can come together and start to acquire and become this larger scale agency, all born around the CRO model. That was a thought that went into my mind, right? And I considered that throughout the process, but I thought we were too small to even approach the market at that point, even though we were growing really fast. In hindsight, again, I still think we absolutely made the right decision. But yeah, so it did cross my mind a bit, but just straight acquisition wasn't really in the cards.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I mean, you also gave us a glimpse of where you're at now. But before we get to where you're at now, structuring the deal. So you obviously went into it trying to find a good partner. You were able to see in the buyers opportunities for you to expand your value, expand your capabilities, the logos, be successful, candidly, right? How did that, and I know Todd and I know how he influences, but how did all of that dictate the parameters to which you would accept the deal?
Yeah. So a few things was starting with talking with those founders and those leadership teams to understand, how did they envision CRO fitting in? Did they already have a big CRO outfit and they just wanted to bolt on a new batch of clients and we were just going to be an extension to that team? Did they want to basically start like they never had CRO and this was going to be the launch of that department? Was it somewhere in between? Because what I did not want, candidly, was us just like to be like, oh, we're going to expand our existing, CRO product, right, with this new team. Like that wouldn't have done well for me, wouldn't have done well for my senior leadership, et cetera. So that was a big aspect to it as well. Also, what were their plans? Like, what was their 3-5 year plan in terms of what type of market share do we think we could get to? How realistic was that? What other acquisitions did they have on the horizon, at least projection wise? And then what was their exit strategy, right? Like, what were they looking to do? Because candidly, and we'll probably get into this, I wanted to roll forward a lot of the deal value and equity. I wanted to kind of hitch my cart right there to another larger brand's horse, so to speak, to accelerate the value of that equity. That's kind of the proverbial second bite of the apple, which of course I know Todd educated me a lot on and is a popular thing with many of his clients. But that was a big one there, is again, just how CRO was going to fit into their existing organization, how we could get to some of the larger logo clients, and then how specifically we could lever their plans to, again, have a potential another liquidity event in the not too distant future.
How many discussions did you truly entertain? You don't have to name them, of course, but like, give us a ballpark.
It narrowed down to 3. Yeah, there was 3 main that we were taking very seriously.
And did the fact that Power was on their second private equity firm, I mean, they started with Periscope Equity, they had success, Court Square shows up, they have kind of a maturity around the model, they have a clear strategy. Did that tilt things in their favor? Was it neutral? What do you think of that?
At least one, I'm trying to remember if all 3 did, but at least one of the others had strong private equity backing as well. It wasn't The allure of private equity wasn't really it for me. Like, it was more of just, again, what is their vision? And candidly, I had incredible conversations with the Court Square team. They were very patient with me from the beginning when we were going through the LOI stages, when they were kind of courting me, so to speak, during due diligence. They were, and I know PE gets a bad rap a lot, especially in the M&A space for smaller businesses. Maybe I'm a little bit of the outlier here, but to me, it was a tremendous experience. They were really transparent, very helpful, always available to answer questions. Candidly, every time I really got, even slightly frustrated or confused, it was really almost 100% of the time because of my ignorance, right? Just not understanding how the process went. And so I wouldn't say within those three that I was really that allured by a larger established PE shop or not. It was more of just like, what is the 3 to 5 year plan? How do we legitimately get there? What are all your assumptive models built into your projection? So I could kind of pressure test those based on my experience. And did that make sense? And then lastly, and arguably most importantly, just what was the relationship like? Candidly, right? Did we get along? Did we see cultural fit? And, the Court Square guys, even beyond the power, I'm close with them. You know what I mean? We still communicate, and they still to this day have been awesome to work with. They're a really professional group.
Well, you had the intention to roll over quite a bit within the deal. So that means you're able to get a little bit higher of a purchase price than most who are trying to maximize it, because you're coming to the table with that investor mindset. And therefore, you are one of the investors in the business. The people administering that business, both from a private equity perspective, but also from an executive and management perspective, influences your confidence in investing and rolling. And you're right, private equity does get a bad rap. But there's a lot of really good ones who have great track records and also have great people who are a part of them. Maybe talk briefly on how did you reverse due diligence that? Other than having someone like Todd help you through the process, what got you comfortable with that amount of rollover in a deal like this?
Yeah. It was mainly around Power's continued growth trajectory and what they had done in the last 3 to 4 years and what their projections, again, based on those assumptive models, were in the next 3 years. And so that was probably 80%, 90% with my conversations with Grayson, kind of the chairman of Power and the original founder. So going through, again, how they showed me the projected financial models. Here's where we're at. Here's where we're going to get to organically. Here's where we're going to get to by kind of tying on acquisitions. Here's going to be the assumptive models with every acquisition, including yours, what we think the year-over-year growth could be. I thought they were candidly being conservative on a lot of those metrics, and we ended up being right, at least on ours. The thought in terms of the year-over-year growth, we blew out of the water, to be honest.
What's your title at Power Digital, by the way?
Yeah, mine, Chief Growth Officer. But, it was a lot based on those models. And just, I didn't really dig a whole lot into all of the historical deals that Court Square had done, because they're a big PE shop and have a lot of different verticals. And so, I got to know them and understand what their vision was. And candidly, even small things like, this made a big deal for me. You might chuckle, but like when the LOI came over, 2 of the 3 groups emailed it to Todd, and then he got on the phone with me and was like, here's what they are up. Court Square and Power didn't want to do that. They booked a 2-hour presentation with me, and they spent 2 hours pitching me on why Power, why Court Square, why the model, what it all meant, why we'd be a powerhouse together. They really, put the time in and the effort in. It was just so obvious how much they wanted this deal to happen. And so, and then of course the financial side, it was a very strong offer as well. So you put all that together, but yeah, it was really 90% candidly my interaction with like Court Square from the day I met them through the process that did it, less me kind of doing a ton of due diligence on historical deals. Although of course I did do some of that, and they've had obviously a lot of success as a firm.
Well, you didn't have private equity experience selling or really anything before. And so it sounds like they were patient, they educated you, they explained things, and they walked you through it, which pays dividends in a deal. And then I think it's important to note for the listener, there's terms on these private equity investments. So they're in it for a period of time. They're trying to get a level of performance, and you contribute to that accomplishment. And they can incentivize you with that second bite, with that next opportunity, if you're confident in the business model that they're executing and you're positively contributing to it. As Chief Growth Officer, you got to positively contribute to it. So let the listeners know, where are you post-close? How far along?
Yeah, in terms of my process or just Power in general, or?
your process. You are how many months?
Yeah. Let's see. We're chatting here in March of 2025. We closed December 4th, I think it was 2023, right? So we're about a year and a quarter in, almost exactly, right, into the partnership. Integration was relatively smooth. Like there's always going to be some challenges with integrations, right? But relatively smooth. We obviously grew 100% as a division, formerly as Enrock, now is the CRO division within Power, which is, I know is better than everyone's projections that we had built out. And then on top of that, me personally, I have a multi-year earnout structure as well, of which, the first year was hit easily, and that's great and good for everybody, obviously. So on to the second year now, and we're, having a strong year. So yeah, everything is in good position, and I'm mainly focused on that equity roll forward that I had and what I can continue to do beyond just CRO to help Power grow, right? As a former solo agency owner, and now as a, one of the several owners within the agency. But yeah.
Well, I mean, that's wonderful. You also made your second year performance, it sounds like, a little bit more challenging by being so successful in the first year.
Yeah. But the good news is we finished 2024 really strong. So when you do the year over year, like January comparison, I mean, it's like dramatically different. But yes, we did move the benchmarks up.
Do you feel that the role you're sitting in gave you a disproportionate level of influence on the earnout versus if you sat in a different role?
Well, given how active I am, and I'm still doing a lot of the CRO work, yeah, I mean, I can directly affect it, no doubt about it. Yeah, absolutely. Which, to me, I probably wouldn't have had it any other way. It's like, you can't, I know you can, but it's like, don't offer an earnout if the individual can't affect it in any way. You don't want to just roll the dice, right? So in that respect, yeah, I can majorly affect it and have and will continue to do so, which I think is fair, right? Because if we don't hit it, we don't justifiably earn it, right? And if we do, we do, of course. So yeah, but again, obviously my role expands even beyond that into the opportunity to expand Power continuously to try to hit our larger organizational goals over this year.
You shared with us some of that pretense that bringing in a partner, you were doing everything, wearing all the hats, and now you have a professional partner who runs that side. Did it do what it said on the tin? Did it free you up to focus on this financial and business building side that you're really more passionate and energized with?
Yeah, majorly, for sure. I mean, in the first 3 to 4 months working together, of course, there was a lot of, hey, you got used to invoice clients this way. We don't do it that way. Help us just make sure this is smooth. And of course, it's like, you're not just going to step away the day after acquisition and not be helpful, of course. And so in that case, the beginning took a little bit more work to just make sure of a seamless transition. But if I look at it like now, I mean, of that other work that I was doing outside of just perfecting our strategy and working with clients, 90% of it is off my plate. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would tell yourself in that early 2003 to kind of like maximize enterprise value? Things that like after the deal closed, like, oh, that would have made it easier. That you have as lessons that you could go back and tell Ned to focus on?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, one of them is a bit unfortunately and regrettably, I got a little casual on some accounts receivable, mainly because, again, we were growing so fast. We had great margins. Obviously, like you said, it was a lifestyle business. Just being the sole owner, just to put it out, I had tremendous cash flow, right? Tremendous cash flow. And it was like, oh, okay, an extra little AR didn't come in this month or that month. I was very just like, don't worry about it with clients, didn't push them as hard. And that dinged me a little bit, right? Obviously, because when we got to it, being a larger, more professional organization, you really want to be firm on those things with clients. And, you have contractual obligations to them. They do to you in the form of prompt payments, et cetera. And so that was one where I was a little too casual, which I think is probably a classic thing that you see with a lot of lifestyle business solo entrepreneurs, right? Is they don't quite crack the whip too hard when they're earlier stage. And that's something I would advise others to get a little tighter ship there, at least 3 to 6 months before you start running a process, right? So that was a big one. Candidly, I'm very data oriented. So I kept pretty meticulous reporting on most everything with the business. So it was easy to transfer all of my reporting over. That's something I have heard historically. A couple folks in the deal team had told me it was the most organized they had seen any first month of the deal with due diligence. So I think that's more of like here's what I did well to other folks you should be very keen on. And I mean, have meticulous records of all your CRM, all of your HR, everything, who came, when did they leave, why did they leave, sentiment analysis, all of these things, right? And yeah, I mean, that being said, I wouldn't have done anything different to try to affect a higher valuation with where we were at. We did get an interesting offer where, because we were growing so much, most of our valuation was actually on forward-looking EBITDA, not on historical, which for larger size businesses is probably not as typical. It's a little more atypical, but for smaller businesses that are growing really quickly, it does make a lot of sense. That put a whole nother layer of pressure on the deal because I had to hit numbers too, right? And growth curves. I would recommend candidly any smaller size business do that, because it's like, yeah, if you really think you're going to be worth this at the end of the year or next year, whatever, put your money where your mouth is. Like, set those goals and then go hit it, and then try to be compensated for that, right? And then make it happen. But that's what we did. So there's more of a recommendation, not so much of what I would have done differently. I would have definitely done that the same way. Yeah, there's not a whole lot I would have done differently, to be honest. I think we got a great offer. I think we found a great partner. The process was smooth. A few little things there I could have done better about. Probably should have kept a little bit more cash in the company as an example, right? I mean, but again, it just gets worked out in the net working capital adjustments anyways. So it's not a huge.
In our prep call, you mentioned Latin America.
Yeah.
So you had over 100 people within the company.
Mm-hmm.
What was the composition of the people, and then how did Latin America factor into its operation and then ultimately the deal?
Yeah, of course. So I had over the years built out some tremendous workforce, just incredible folks on the team based out of certain Latin American countries you had mentioned, namely Colombia, Mexico, Ecuador, specifically a little bit of Argentina as well. And we had built out 4 offices. So in Cartagena, Colombia, Medellin, Bogota, and in Quito, Ecuador. So a lot of those folks originally started as designers and developers and account managers for the company, right? I needed heavy execution work, and I decided to nearshore a lot of that talent. So as I was using my US employees were more of the direct client facing, what I called like growth leads, CRO leads, right? As we began to mature as an agency, we started to uncover even more talent within Latin America that some of which are, just outstanding, right? A whole batch of them were, sure, maybe born in Latin America, but were US educated, went to US universities, et cetera. And now they had returned back to whichever country that they're from, and they were contributing to that economy and doing great things. And we were lucky enough to recruit some of them over to Enrock. So by the time we exited, some of our senior most leadership was based out of some of the Latin American cities, right? And Power saw that really valuable, right? There's a kind of arbitrage of cost-based talent, of course, that you can exercise there. And yeah, in terms of the composition split, by the time we actually exited, it was really diverse. We had, design development, execution, data analytics, and senior account strategy based out of both the United States and Latin.
Were you the first company in their portfolio with that composition?
With Power Digital, yes. Within Court Square, I don't know, to be honest, but it again, the stars kind of aligned because it was something that Power was keen on doing on their own accord, whether they had acquired us or not, which was to expand, particularly into Latin America. I know a lot of groups, especially in the development front, have gone down the route with India or Vietnam or the Philippines, et cetera, which is, all well and good, but not realizing you've got this gem of talent just south of us that, by the way, is in the same time zone, which makes a huge difference, right? So I think they had intended on doing it. And then when they found Enrock, not only did it fit the mold for this missing puzzle piece of a large, successful CRO organization, but it also already had boots on the ground and inroads in some of these countries, right? And so that was another big win for them as well.
When you were building this business and you ultimately had a team in place, leadership that weren't in your backyard, the label of this is it's hard to control culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sold to private equity, which has a bad rap for culture.
Mm-hmm.
So just your whole storyline's littered with atypical, you go through the hearsay, scenarios of cultural integration and compatibility. Just briefly, for those who do not have experience building a more global workforce, remote, it sounds like, and then selling and then going into private equity and that culture, dispute the objections. So how are you able to maintain a culture that is creating value through those two different storylines?
Yeah. So starting with how did we build it, right? Well, first off, geographically, I'm based in Miami. So Miami to Cartagena is a 2-hour flight, right? To Medellin's 3 hours. It's really easy to get down. And there's, So just from a logistics standpoint, it was easier and still is to this day for me to get to my offices there, even through customs, and I can go see a client in New York, to give you an idea. So I made, and still to this day, monthly frequent trips. So I spent a lot of time with the team right there in the office with them. On top of it, and probably more importantly, I had and was able to attract and retain and grow a specific handful of leaders within the company who carried the torch, right? They understood the culture that I built, and they just like every day would implement it, whether it was in office or even remote with the team there. We also did things like retreats. So we do biannual retreats where I bring some of the leadership in, and then we do a big company retreat every year where I'd fly them all to Mexico or some great resort, and we'd spend 5 days together, 4 days together. And that was always, a lot of fun. And, we still to this day talk a lot about that and the stories that came out of it. So there's a lot of great friendships were built out of it too. And we were also just so focused on this one thing, which was like, how do you grow the ARPU of a client? How do you do that from a dev, a design, a behavioral heuristic standpoint, a data analytics standpoint? And so we were all very narrow focused on what the goal was. So that's that on a culture perspective. Now, how do you then take that culture and blend it in when now all of a sudden the big bad wolf private equity comes in? Candidly, I think is more of a testament to CourtSquare is while they're hands-on in the respect of being helpful, they're also hands-off and not trying to tell us how to run our own cultural integration. And the Power Digital team and the Enrock team just immediately saw fit. As an example, as we were preparing for sale, I spent a lot of time meeting the Power team. The Power team flew down to Colombia several times to meet my leadership team, right? And not just meet them. I mean, we did dinners, we did breakfast, we did all the things, right? For like a week straight. So they really got to know them well. And then when we actually went through the acquisition and into legitimate integration, it was easy. It was seamless. Most of the folks all knew each other well already, right? So CourtSquare has been tremendous to basically just kind of stand in the background and be like, do what you know what to do and do it best. They have not necessarily come in to tell us how to do things better. They've been there when we need them and supportive, but by no means overbearing in any respect, and very cognizant that we know the culture well and we know how to integrate. And it's kind of a case study in cultural integration, to be honest.
Sounds like it.
It's gone really well. Yeah.
I've heard you talk openly about your deal kind of being atypical-ish compared to some other things you had heard in the marketplace, and now sitting on the Power side, interacting with the market as there's other deals always on play. How would you, if you had 30 seconds with someone who's being courted by CourtSquare, by Power, what would that 30 seconds with them look like if you were trying to prep them for the opportunity to potentially join you on the Power side?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, and I've said this to any companies that have come to me and say, hey, what advice do you have, is first and most importantly, be wildly transparent with everything in the business. Do not, this is not a typical deal where you're going to be able to hide anything. Be very, but because, I mean, I could go on and on as to the reasons why. Probably the single biggest reason why is, as you know, in due diligence, they're going to find it, right? If there's any skeletons in the closet anywhere, they're going to find it.
Professionals at finding it, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Because again, due diligence is a multi-month, we're talking 3, 4, 5 month intensive process. And so they're going to find it. So be very transparent. Second to that is, for all you know, your weakness might be one of their strengths. That's an easy, we can solve that type of thing. As an example, our finance team was really small and lean. They have a tremendous finance department. So they were very much like, okay, yeah, we can plug in there and solve any of those challenges you have. That's not a negative. That's a positive for the deal structure. So things that you might think are negative and you're shy about saying to a potential suitor could actually be a catalyst for the deal. So be hyper transparent. That would be number one. Number two would candidly be know your stuff, if you know what I mean, right? Know your numbers, know your churn rate, know your trailing 90, 180, know your collections rate, know your average client value on different segments, core, growth, enterprise. In ours, we're D2C focused. So fashion, health, beauty, know all of those numbers, be able to answer them on the spot. A, you should already know it, candidly, but B, it shows that you've got a tremendous grasp empirically on what's going on with your business, right? Where you have opportunities for continued advancement, where you have opportunities for investment to improve, et cetera. That's going to go a long way, knowing your numbers really well. And then I would say third thing is have a very clear structure on who the core players in your team are, right? Who the core potential key man risks are. Right. So as an example, if you do this integration and your number 2, number 3, number 4 gal is going to leave, what's that going to do to the business? And have those projections built out, A, to identify who those people are, B, what we need to do to retain them, And then C, if God forbid they were to leave, how do we solve that? Because that's not something the acquirer is going to want to figure out on their own. That they want you to come to the table with that. And most businesses I talk to are either weak or non-existent in most of those three areas I just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, that's not in the entrepreneur handbook. So you got to a certain productive size of multiple seven figures in EBITDA. You found a private equity strategic, and then you did a deal where you rolled a good percentage as an investor. But you knew you were coming on as a chief growth officer who had intervention capabilities around the performance. Was there a version of this deal, or could there have been a version of the deal where you walked away instead of staying on?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I guess in the beginning, had they said something like, we don't really need you, we're just going to plug your team in here, I just candidly would have been like, I don't think it's going to work. So no, I don't really want to do that. Also, had they said, we're not going to tie you into the larger clients, right? We're just going to keep you on maybe some lower core growth clients. That, is one of the core thesis of why I wanted to do the deal, was to work up market, right, with some larger enterprises. Of course, if there was any manipulative or bizarre things in the financial breakdown of the deal, right, just way too heavy on earnout as an example, or really aggressive indemnity holdbacks, or I don't know, anything like that, right, then potentially. But all of that was discussed ahead of time before we even got to LOI. We had a general understanding on where all that was going to come in. We didn't have an exact figure on valuation, but we generally knew all of those things. And so the concept that there was an earnout wasn't a surprise. The concept that I wanted to roll forward lock equity was not a surprise. The concept on how due diligence was going to go, obviously you'll see what you find, but wasn't a surprise. So yeah, I mean, short of those things, but again, those were all addressed in like week one. So there really wasn't anything I can imagine outside of some major clause in the EPA that would have, I don't know, just thrown the lawyers through a loop. But outside that, I can't really think of anything that would have shot it dead.
You mentioned the lawyer, so I am going to bring up this one bit because you had help. So you had Todd's help traversing the interactions and kind of buffering you to some capacity. Ned, your energy, you're pretty hands-on. So give us a glimpse. The attorneys, the Q of E process, like how involved really were you? And versus how much did you trust your advisors and the people you hired to support you on the deal? Or did you not? And you just kind of did both?
Yeah, I don't want to use the word trust just because it make it sound like I didn't. I trusted them all implicitly, but I'm a very, as you had mentioned, hands-on. So I was on every call, every single call. And we went through every aspect together. So it was really the me show for almost all of it. Even if I had my CFO there with me, I was doing most of the answers. The more technical ones that I couldn't, he would explain, but I was really involved. And again, it was not for a lack of trust or anything like that. It was more of mainly I'm just obsessed about knowing what's going on. And so I wanted to be involved regardless. Even if they were like, you really don't need to attend, I was still going to attend, right? Regardless. So I think it was more of just my leadership and personality style, I guess, more than anything. The quality of earnings went very smooth. I assumed it would, and it did go fine. The very things they called out and flagged were the things that I had disclosed ahead of time were my concerns. So there was no surprises there. And yeah, when we got, a lot of it was candidly like not applicable. I mean, you get like a really intensive insurance breakdown, and like we were just not big enough of a company with enough liabilities that it was that big of a thing. So there was days of questions that were kind of just like not applicable. But that's okay. It's just part of the process, So
as we get to the tail end, you're in this earnout portion. You got another year, sounds like, tacked on. You had a non-compete probably in that as well.
Yeah.
So you're focused on the power side of the house at the moment. What is the acquisition criteria now that you're on this side? Like what's that look like from power? Do you contribute to it? Is there anything as a listener, someone can go, oh, I sound similar to Ned, but they already closed with Ned. So maybe they're not going to do a deal with me, but give me a sense of what's good for power now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, first and foremost, any organization that's got a tremendous culture, right, and that can prove that, and has tremendous culture both internally and externally, meaning good employee retention rates, great culture internally, but also good client retention rates. The last thing we want is a churn and burn type of agency, right, to get involved with. So that would probably be number one. Number two to that would be some core differentiating factor. As an example, even though Power had the makings of a CRO department, like I had a system and I had built this whole model and it was going to overnight transform the whole conversion optimization experience as a service provider by Power. And it did overnight. We'd love to find others like that, right? That being said, of course, there's still a myriad of other agencies out there that provide great, the traditionals, email, SEO, paid media, et cetera. If the culture fit is right, if the economics are right in terms of how they retain clients and interact with clients, and if we really see the logo value there, then there's an opportunity to kind of bundle that in, so to speak, via acquisition with our existing departments that do that. In terms of the economic aspect, anyone that's certainly in the 5 to 10 million EBITDA range would be a great conversation to have. Certainly open to some of the ones that are sub 5 million. Granted, really, anything sub 3 is a bit of a challenge, to be candid. But again, if it's got a really unique offering with a really strong founder who wants to be an operator, et cetera, there's the conversations can be had. But, ideally a little bit higher EBITDA range there is where we're looking. And yeah, yes.
The best deals have cultural alignment in them. You said you got on with Grayson really well. Just using Power as the use case, how would you describe the culture? And then how did you fit that culture so well?
Yeah. The culture is quite transparent, quite open, and quite congratulatory, to be honest, right? There's a lot of patting on the back when folks do even little things well, which is a big deal. That gets overlooked a lot as you become a larger organization, and it makes a big deal, especially when you are a junior account manager in Medellin, Colombia, and you're working for an 850 employee agency that's private equity backed, and it's this big gun group, and you're new, and all of a sudden you do something well, and to have senior leadership in front of 850 people call you out for such a good job you did, that makes a big impact. It really does, right? And so it's a very congratulatory style culture, which I love. That's awesome. Celebrating all those wins. It also does a great job of a ethos that I have, which is from the day I started this company, one thing that I implored upon my employees was bad news up, good news down. Meaning if something negative happens, you had a hard conversation with a client, you're disappointed with the performance of someone on your team, you go up the ladder. Meaning you come to someone like me and we have those conversations. You never go down and explain that. We'll do that more strategically. However, if really good things happen, yeah, I want to hear, but tell the team, right? Because when you're excited about the great work they did or how happy the client was, that just boosts their morale even more. And Power just inherently does a good job with that, right? At senior leadership, sure, we'll absorb all the stuff day to day and week to week that we have to deal with. But a lot of the folks that are in the trenches every day continuously hear more about the positives of what's going on. And that's really important for culture. And then also it's just a very warm and open, I don't know any other way to say it, friendly culture. Everybody's really nice, very welcoming. And it's really, really been a joy, I think, to work with.
What's the one thing you want a listener to take away from your experience?
Yeah. The one thing, gosh, so many. Geez, you put me, this is probably the most simple question, but also the hardest question in the whole conversation here. The one thing, and I'm assuming I'm talking to another agency owner, right, who may or may not have interest in exiting. I can say that the one thing I would take away is if you can find the right group, it can accelerate your goals by probably 5 to 10 years. If you find the right group. And of course, that almost feels like a little bit of a cop-out to say that because it's like, we'll find the right group, but candidly, financially, the growth of your business, it can make a massive difference, right? And you find the right group. And on top of that, the doors that it can open as you continuously grow in your post-acquisition. I mean, you've got a major feather in your cap. So for anyone out there that's got a fast-growing agency that's maybe on the fence, should I do this? Should I not do this? There are a huge amount of pros to this. And I know as an industry, we talk a lot about the landmines to look out for and the negatives, but to me, the positives have far outweighed any potential negatives or dark spots. So, again, kind of a general response there, but I would say, take the consideration quite seriously, but don't discount the fact it could be one of the best decisions you ever made.
Ned, this has been an incredible discussion. Thank you for sharing your insights, lessons, both from the acquisition process, but also setting the expectation for someone who is going to be finding themselves in a similar boat to you. Obviously say private equity doesn't have to be the bad place many people try to make it sound like. And I think You've done a great job not only being a personification of what Power's doing in the marketplace and being that exception to the negative reputation, but also sharing the journey that so many didn't start their agencies thinking they're going to accomplish. So, Ned, thank you.
You bet. Appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.